Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Owned by Fate by Tessa Bailey. Narrated by Elizabeth Hart. Chapter 1. So, a respected financial journalist and an award-winning interior designer walk into a BDSM club. Caroline Preston trailed off as she perused her surroundings with typical Manhattan coolness, wondering where they'd stashed the stockades. And nothing. That's the entire joke. Eliza, Caroline's best friend since their days at Columbia, chuckled under her breath. We just walked in. Try and last a minute before condemning it. They climbed onto plush leather chairs at the ultra-sleek bar. Who knows? You might even gasp. Have a good time. Caroline sent her a skeptical look. One drink, and then we go get dumplings and froyo. That was the deal. You're forgetting that I'm here because you asked me to come. Eliza tried to place a credit card on the bar, but Caroline beat her to it and signaled the bartender to start a tab. Any other Friday night, I would have been in my pajamas watching HGTV, operating under the delusion that my career is more fulfilling than a social life. Is there room under your delusion umbrella for one more? Why? You've got your own. Caroline threw a good-natured scowl at her friend before leaning back in her chair to scrutinize the nightclub. It was a seamless melange of grays, whites, blacks, and purples. Stainless steel fixtures provided minimal light, somehow dimming the volume of conversations to a collective purr in the darkness. Located in the meatpacking district, just across the street from the Hudson, Surf appeared to be one of the many exclusive nightclubs in the area. The first floor gave that impression, anyway. Red velvet ropes, darkened windows, bouncers with earpieces looking judgmental. But everyone, even Caroline, knew what happened on the 3 floors above. 3 floors that catered to guests with more interesting tastes. Well, interesting to someone else, maybe. Just not her. She'd only set foot in the place for one express purpose: to hate it. So far, no issues on that front, although Caroline had to admit that the clientele surprised her. As a financial journalist, she rubbed elbows daily with Wall Street's elite, which appeared to be Surf's main demographic. Men who possessed that typical boardroom executive bearing were tucked into shadowy corners, whispering in the ears of women wearing stylish, expensive clothes. Did they know what lurked above them? They must. People such as these didn't walk into any situation without inspecting all angles. Right? Caroline's shoulders drooped a little, remembering why she'd come. Her family's esteemed financial magazine, Preston's Daily Finance, was tanking. They were 1 month tops from declaring bankruptcy. They'd spent weeks scrambling, trying to find new advertisers, and even downsizing the staff. It wasn't enough. Everything had seemed hopeless until her brother, Oliver, arrived at the board's weekly meeting with a patently insane idea. He'd found someone willing to bail out the magazine. A Manhattan-based publisher of lifestyle magazines wanted to revamp Preston's, combining finance with more exotic, adventurous themes directed at the wealthy, BDSM included. Of course, she and her father had dismissed the idea as absurd, but Oliver had been dogged, insisting it would be a lucrative venture. It had given Caroline pause, seeing him so passionate about something, a total departure from his usual laid-back demeanor. So while her father had voted no outright, Caroline, the only other board member beside her brother, had agreed on a trial run of sorts. She wouldn't be trying out the amenities herself. God, no. She'd be doing what she did best, writing what she saw. They would publish a short feature about Serve in the current version of their magazine and observe the fallout. Knowing there wasn't a chance in hell of a positive response, the situation was a win-win for her. She didn't cut her brother, who she loved, off at the knees. Plus, the risky and downright ridiculous idea went away pronto. So here she was, taking mental notes for a story on a place that specialized in bondage and domination. Not her typical Friday night. Drinks being placed on the bar in front of her, and Eliza brought Caroline back to the present. She raised an eyebrow at the red lollipop-garnished martini. Combined with the low strains of Tom Waits drifting across the spacious lounge and several discreet cage-themed fixtures adorning the walls, Caroline concluded the owner must have had an odd sense of humor. One would have to, she reasoned, to build a business model on the foundation of spankings. She chuckled under her breath at the thought. What prompted that sinister-as-hell laugh? Nothing. I'm just wondering if there's some sort of spanking sign-up sheet being passed around. Eliza took a testing sip of her drink and made a pleased sound at the taste. I think it's more of a conversation system. Your hand, my ass, let's do this? That type of thing? Compelling, Caroline. I actually have goosebumps. They traded smirks. Oh, come on. I don't want to live in a world where spankings come with legal disclaimers. You do everything else by the book. Why not outline the terms of your own booty bashing? Caroline nearly spit out her drink. Don't ever say that again. She shook her head. And I wouldn't consider on my worst day having my booty bashed. Oh, you can say it. By some random weirdo wearing a clown mask. Eliza held up a hand. Okay, wait. What the fuck are you talking about? Caroline pushed her hair over her shoulder. Look, I might have ended up on some weird websites this afternoon. You know how I like to do my research. The point is, she held up a finger when Eliza started to interrupt. Dumplings. The point is dumplings. Eliza melted back into her seat with a pensive expression. Caroline, I love a good dumpling. You know this about me. She tapped at the rim of her martini glass with her index finger. But we never let ourselves go. Shouldn't girls our age engage in the occasional fling? You know, embrace your sexual freedom and give our middle finger to the man? What are you saying? You want to be spanked by a clown? No more talk of clowns. Eliza shivered. Besides, I think I'm more of a flogging girl. Caroline did a double take. What? You're the only one who can do research? No, of course not. Caroline studied her best friend. They'd been inseparable since freshman year at Columbia when they'd been paired as roommates. She knew when Eliza was being serious. This appeared to be one of those times. A fine time to spring this on me. We could have started small, pottery classes or something. That got the desired laugh. Listen, all I'm saying is, if the opportunity presents itself, I might consider going upstairs and buy you a drink. Eliza and Caroline swiveled around to face the newcomer. A gorgeous, dark-haired man with a teasing smile and a hint of a British accent. He looked them both over with interest but winked at Eliza, who flushed red straight to the roots of her blonde hair. Sure. Perfect. On one condition. You bring it with you when we dance. His grin was slow and sexy. You don't mind if I steal her for a bit, right? Eliza widened her blue eyes at Caroline and gave a subtle headshake. In other words, don't be a cock-block. She couldn't exactly say no, could she? Even if her worst nightmare consisted of sitting alone in this den of iniquity for an interminable length of time while Eliza got her freak on. After her friend's speech about feeling restless in their predictability, she had a feeling upstairs was exactly where the duo would be headed. She'd barely had time to process her friend's newly adventurous outlook before the dark-haired Brit had appeared. She recalled Eliza's words, though, as they echoed now in her head. We never let ourselves go. If her friend wanted to subject herself to humiliation in the name of spontaneity, who was she to stop her? Later, though, they'd be having a heart-to-heart. Oh, go ahead. Caroline gave the man a once-over, memorizing his features in case she ever had to pick him out of a lineup. He looks like Gavin Rossdale resurrected from the 90s. You can hardly say no. Eliza beamed. Be back soon. Promise. I'll be here. Caroline flounced back in her seat and watched the two disappear into the darkness of the dance floor. They were immediately swallowed by the writhing crowd. Since Caroline and Eliza's arrival, the music had increased in volume, Dozens of customers apparently feeling loose enough from their alcohol consumption to dance. Bodies were pressed together intimately, some even kissing. Caroline swung her attention back to the bar, pretending to be immersed in her drink. With one hand, she swirled the red lollipop, creating a mini whirlpool in her martini. At least she'd have time to pepper the bartender with questions about what it was like to work in a place like this. When a solid male figure leaned against the bar beside her, she tried not to look up, even though she could feel his gaze on her. She didn't want to make eye contact with any member of the opposite sex. He might talk to her, and she'd inevitably be forced to rebuff his awkward advances. But he smelled like red vines, not a hint of spicy cologne or laundry detergent, just red licorice. Caroline had always been inquisitive, even from an early age, hence the journalism degree framed above her office desk. Inconsistencies drew her. She needed to make sense out of this guy who smelled so different from every other musky-scented man in the club. That was the only reason she looked up. Her gaze stayed locked on him for several more compelling reasons. In addition to being curious by nature, Caroline had an odd habit of matching people she met with their celebrity look-alike. Eliza was a blonde Alexis Bledel, post-Gilmore Girls, pre-traveling pants. Her brother Oliver resembled a taller, darker version of Chris Pine. This guy looked like no one. As she'd suspected, he was regarding her steadily through narrowed eyes. In the dim lighting, she couldn't discern their color, but she guessed a deep brown. His light chestnut-colored hair was parted on one side, slightly damp and pushed over in one direction, as if he'd begun to slick it down, then forgot. His nose appeared to have been broken once or twice. Something you might not notice unless you were searching for flaws. Components of him were imperfect, but somehow, when combined, he was extraordinary. Caroline decided she could admit that irritating fact and still sleep soundly tonight, as long as she didn't let him know she'd thought it. Bottom line, if he was in this place, he wasn't the type of person she wanted to associate with. She gave a cursory glance to his wide shoulders, noting that his casual posture did nothing to detract from his overall ruggedness, and went back to staring into her drink. She felt a shiver pass down her spine when his baritone voice filled the space between them.
Are you going to suck it, or just play with it all night?
Chapter 2. Excuse me? Jonah Briggs felt a punch of satisfaction when the woman's eyes flashed up at him dangerously from her lower seated position.
Not quite so indifferent now, are you, sweetheart?
He jerked his chin toward her drink.
The lollipop. When are you going to give in and suck it?
When her lips parted, half in comprehension of his meaning, half in indignation, Jonah had to bite back a groan. Her mouth. It's what had brought him downstairs in the first place. On Friday nights, he always remained upstairs, watching the operation run smoothly on several high-definition monitors, making sure his customers behaved themselves and left satisfied. Even now he could hear the curious whispers floating around him. Patrons wondering what had brought him downstairs when the real party raged 3 floors above their heads. It was where he should be. He shouldn't be bothering with this clearly uptight, disapproving sightseer. And yet, here he was, trying to get her to suck a goddamn lollipop. His fascination with the curve of a woman's lips couldn't necessarily be considered a fetish, per se. It had never been quite that extreme. Until now. She sat there, prim and righteous in her seat, tortoiseshell glasses perched on her button nose, melted caramel hair straightened to perfection at her shoulders, with no inkling of the mental fantasies he'd already acted out with that mouth. Both of her rosy lips were plump, but the upper one was somehow bigger, more sensual. It rested on its counterpart like a lazy goddess lounging on a silk pillow. He wanted to taste the fuck out of that mouth. Jonah reined in his riotous thoughts, still irritated with himself for riding his private elevator down to the first floor, just to see her up close, without the artificial glow of a monitor to detract from the shine she gave off. He knew her type. She'd been dragged here by a friend or otherwise coerced into coming. When he'd first noticed her from the comfort of his security room, her image picked up by one of more than 100 cameras, He could practically feel her disdain through the electronic feed. He'd had more than enough judgment to last him a lifetime. He certainly didn't need to seek it out, in his own club especially. At the reminder of just how sharply he'd been stung recently by the judgment of specters from his past, those who found his chosen profession repulsive, Jonah quickly shifted his attention to the girl's toned, tightly crossed thighs, as if a hint of daylight between them would cause her to burst into flames. Jonah almost laughed out loud.
No fire play down here, sweetheart. We restrict that to the 3rd floor.
Jonah rubbed his knuckles along his jaw. He'd made it a rule never to engage with the willing women inside his own club. So why was he wasting his time on a decidedly unwilling one? It made little sense, and now that he stood inches away, Jonah could admit coming downstairs had been a huge mistake. Because now he wanted, desperately, to bring her back upstairs with him. He watched her tongue glide over her bottom lip, leaving it coated in slick moisture.
Dear God. Just one kiss and I'll let this one go. I swear on a stack of Bibles.
Again, he almost laughed. His name might be Jonah, but it was the only biblical quality he possessed. Thank you for reminding me why I avoid places like this and people like you. She pulled the dripping lollipop out of her drink and bit it in half with a crunch, keeping her eyes deliberately locked on his. Now go try that line again on someone with a bustier and leather pants. I'll pass. Jonah dragged his gaze up from her mouth, knowing he'd be looking again within seconds. He'd gone rigidly hard when she'd sunk her white teeth into the lollipop, not only because her spirit turned him on like hell, but because it had felt like a transgression. She'd gone against his long-indulged wishes, and his dominant instincts made him want to chasten her for it. Have that fierce spirit at his command. Not her. Not yet, anyway.
See, that was unwise. Now I'm just picturing you in a bustier.
Her eyebrows lifted innocently. Well, knock it off.
The bustier?
She hummed in her throat, sizing him up as if for the first time. It wasn't, but if she wanted to delude herself into thinking she hadn't checked him out thoroughly minutes earlier, he'd play along. While she mounted her next attack, Jonah nodded at the bartender to pour him a drink. This was going to take a while. Caroline watched the action with interest, not missing a thing. Her smile turned smug. All right. I think we know where this is going, Johnny pickup line. Jonah sighed at his bartender's jerky reaction to the girl's disrespect, something he never tolerated under any circumstances. No doubt the entire staff would know by the end of the night. It had better be worth it. You're obviously a regular here and know what goes on a short elevator ride away, so I have to ask myself, what are you doing moving in on me? Possibly the only woman at the bar who isn't dressed for whatever evil torture goes on upstairs.
And what conclusions have you drawn?
Either you've already gone through every woman in the joint.
I think there might have been a compliment in there somewhere.
Or you think I'm waiting for someone to show me the ropes. Pun intended. Maybe you're thinking I read that oh-so-popular novel and I'm here to hog-tie my very own billionaire? He feigned ignorance.
What book?
She blew out an exasperated breath. If you are indeed a regular in this, she waved her hands around, scene, then I'm sure you're familiar with it. I'm dropping it now. Any further discussion on the subject would indicate that I'm curious, which I most certainly am not. Her glasses slipped down her nose and she pushed them back up. He squashed the sudden urge to throw them across the room and punish her smart mouth with his own harder one. I'm not being critical, but I refuse to facilitate a discussion wherein you try to convince me pleasure through pain is the ultimate high. That's where this is headed, isn't it?
For someone who has never tried it, you seem terribly confident it's not.
A person doesn't necessarily need to encounter pain to know they don't desire it. For example, without having been hit by a semi-truck before, I'm pretty sure it would suck. Jonah hid his smile by taking a pull from his scotch, watching her over the rim of his glass before he lowered it.
What if I told you it's only about pain for some? For others, it's an entirely different experience.
He watched her process that, liking the fact that she wasn't disregarding his words outright. She was listening, weighing, deciding whether or not she agreed. It was refreshing. So often he found people were unwilling to consider any point of view save their own. Again, he felt a sting in his chest at the reminder of others' unwillingness to trust a word that came out of his mouth, simply because he owned Serve. If anything, the precautions Serve's management took with each and every individual allowed upstairs should speak for itself. But people refused to trust what they didn't understand. She spoke then, interrupting his dark thoughts. If that's true, that people have different experiences, then tell me, what else is there? For some reason, his answer seemed infinitely important, as if it could make or break the connection developing between him and this woman, whose name he still didn't know. The people who frequented his club knew what they wanted and didn't usually require an explanation about what to expect, so he didn't have much practice putting it into words. He had managers who dealt with beginners. His first experience in a BDSM club had been at age 21, and completely by accident. While on shore leave in Germany during his stint with the Navy, he'd stumbled half-wasted into an underground club, and his life had been irrevocably changed by a half-crazed dominatrix named Velda. He was fairly certain she hadn't sat him down and given him a syllabus.
What else is there?
Jonah tossed back the last of his drink, relishing the burn in his chest.
Trust, communication, honesty, risk, sensation, surrender, power.
His gaze dropped unbidden to her lips again.
It's about permission to explore desires you might not even be aware of yet.
When she licked that plump flesh again, his hand resting on the bar curled into a tight fist.
And sometimes it's just rough, dirty, no-holds-barred fucking.
Her chest had begun to rise and fall with effort, eyes glazed over, looking slightly lost. She swayed toward him just a little, and without hesitation, his body moved closer as if magnetized. One of his knees slid along the outside of her thigh, nudging up the hem of her skirt ever so slightly. That snapped her out of wherever she'd gone. His proximity seemed to alarm her, but he didn't move away completely. She pulled the edges of her collar tighter, and that uneasy movement sent a jolt of irritation through him. Not with her, with himself. He'd clearly gone one step too far. Well, I guess it's a good thing I didn't come here for any of those things.
Right. And I'm not in the business of strong-arming or coercing customers, so please stop fidgeting like I make you nervous.
Something akin to recognition dawned on her face. Wait, what kind of business are you in?
You're sitting in it.
You own Serve? He gave a single nod and stood.
What is your name?
The barest hesitation. Caroline. Jesus. He fucking loved that name. It demanded discipline. His discipline.
Caroline, you seem like the type of person who appreciates honesty. Is that accurate?
She nodded warily. Smart girl.
Good. I'd like you and your precious skepticism to come upstairs with me. I won't ask you to do anything you're not comfortable with. You have my word on that.
He signaled the bartender.
But I can't sit here anymore, and I don't like the idea of leaving you here. In fact, since we're being honest, I hate it.
That gave her pause. Why can't you sit here any longer? Jonah leaned in close, watched her lips part to suck in a quick breath.
Fucking beautiful. Take the risk. The payoff could be glorious. If I sit across from you much longer, I'm going to pull you astride my lap and kiss your superbly formed mouth until you soak straight through my pants.
He pulled back just enough to watch redness suffuse her cheeks.
It wouldn't take long, sweetheart. I can do amazing things with my tongue.
Chapter 3. Caroline's pulse raced. Not in a post-Saturday morning spin class way, in a holy motherfucker someone passed the Gatorade way. Who the hell was this guy? She read people for a living, and yet, for the life of her, nothing he did put him into one of her neatly organized categories. Not an overindulged player or a lonely divorcee, not an unhappily married corporate executive with a wife and 3 kids stashed out on Long Island. Her mind presented and discarded several adjectives to describe him. Intensely concentrated 1 minute, restless and taciturn the next. Finally, she settled on enigmatic, which, to an insanely meticulous person like herself, simply wasn't good enough. She needed something more logical and satisfying. Furthermore, he'd been attempting to pick her up, right? So why keep his owner status a secret until the last minute? Yet another contradiction. He had no idea she was there to write a story, and it probably worked like a charm on the ladies every time. Well, almost every time. Her palms might be tingle-sweating. She might be feeling a tad itchy and restless after his concisely delivered monologue, but no way was she giving in. There would be a light bulb moment at some point where mystery fled and he turned typical. She needed to be there for it. Otherwise, this encounter would forever feel unfinished and undefined. He moved in, his big body pressing closer, waiting for an answer to his non-question. She looked down at her skirt quickly, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle. Really, his question had been more of a mission statement, of which she was the mission. His words bounced around her head like ping-pong balls refusing to settle. She should have already refused, thrown the remains of her drink in his impossible-to-read face for good measure. Why hadn't she? Good question. Instead of blowing him off as originally planned, she'd actually managed to forget her discomfort while they spoke. A feat she could barely manage on a regular date with a regular guy. No, she'd been far too busy trying to figure this one out. Throughout the multitude of articles she'd read on Serve that afternoon, the owner had never once been pictured. She'd found that odd, considering he'd been brazen enough to open a BDSM club without attempting to disguise it, which piqued her journalistic sensibilities even more. The club owner could very well be the focus of her feature. On top of that, wasn't she just a tiny bit curious what went on upstairs? Feeling his gaze on her, she looked up and was immediately drawn back into his riveting intensity. There was knowledge in those eyes, knowledge she didn't have. A man who provided pleasure for a living. Arranged it. If given the opportunity, what would he do to her? Stop. Irrelevant. She pushed the errant thought aside, but her voice came out sounding husky, betraying her. What's going to happen upstairs?
That's entirely up to you.
His gaze traced the curve of her neck, leaving heat in its wake.
My plan is to give you a tour, but you should be fully aware of something before we go up.
When his hand coasted over her hip and squeezed, a tremor racked her belly. Snuck lower. Pulsed. Oh, God. She shouldn't be allowing this. What's that? He brought his mouth within a scant inch of hers.
If you give me the slightest bit of encouragement, I will get you somewhere dark and rough up that mouth with mine. I'll push those lips open and give it a better reason to pout.
Their bodies brushed together, and she almost moaned at the simple contact. His words were weaving some kind of spell, and she needed to get clear of it.
But you won't encourage me, will you, Caroline?
She jerked back. It was a challenge, and she answered it immediately. No. No, she affirmed to herself. No man, especially not some cocky BDSM club owner, would be breaching her defenses this evening. Her brain was in control as always. This response she was having to him, it had to be the atmosphere, the liquor. This place had been designed to test people's judgment, but she wouldn't give in to it. Not on her life. She was here for her story, nothing more. With an alarming effort, Caroline distanced herself from Serve's confusing but undeniably interesting owner and glanced around the lounge. No sign of Eliza and Gavin Rossdale. The crowd had begun to close in around them, pressed.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?